based in a little office in the Millfields. We spend a large part of our time in the offices, but also we go out to meetings, we go out and kind of expand our audience, try and influence people as widely as we can. And we work in lots of partnerships. We couldn't achieve what we achieve without partnership work. So we work with aquariums and ashore centres, whether in this country or overseas, to kind of try and get to an audience, get to kind of the public, if you want to, crudely call people that, and to try and spread our message about sharks and how important we think it is that we achieve some conservation for them. So how do we go about that? Well, one angle and the bit that we're kind of probably most well known for is this really kind of excitingly titled policy advocacy work. This is important stuff. It's not necessarily the stuff that sets people's hearts aflutter, but it is really, really vital. It's working at the policy level, working with scientists to gather the data that we need, to put a good case together, to take to the various different policy-making forums, to try and put sensible policies in place. And a lot of that is about fisheries reform, but also the wildlife conservation stuff comes into that. The policy is right at the heart of wildlife conservation. And what we try to do with the policy advocacy stuff is kind of draw people into it, draw the public into it, to try and get involved with it. So probably our most famous campaign at the moment is No Limits, which is very simply, it's about trying to ensure that where there are shark species that are fished with no catch limits, that's no management whatsoever, that we can get those limits put in place. It almost defies belief that some species such as sharks, which are these kind of beautiful, charismatic creatures, don't have the same level of fisheries management as things like cod and plaice and hake and all of those species that we're very familiar with on our plate. So it's kind of trying to level the playing field really, and that's what No Limits is really aimed at. Is let's stop uncontrolled shark fishing as soon as we possibly can. And there are some key species that kind of come to the fore at different times within this campaign. The blue sharks, the mako sharks, some of the small ones, the less glamorous ones if you like the cat sharks, you might know them as dogfish, tope, smoothhounds, those kind of smaller animals which are making their way to market, are fished, and they kind of turn up in different guises in fish and chip shops. So quite a big piece of work around this policy advocacy stuff, and kind of, as I sort of said, it sort of sits hand in hand with that. If you're going to be working at policy level, if you're going to be kind of changing legislation, then we think that it's very important to then work with the industry that legislation impinges upon. So the fishing industry for one, so how do we work with the fishing industry, for example? We provide annual updates on what the regulations are on every single species that they might encounter. So somebody who's fishing in the North Sea, they will be provided with educational materials or identification materials that allow them to not only know what to do with the species when they catch it, but also some really clear tips on how to identify that species so that there can't be any confusion when it comes to kind of data capture around those catching. And so that's commercial fishing industry, but the work we do with stakeholders also extends to recreational anglers. So we've got good practice guidelines, handling guidelines for people who do catch sharks through recreational angling. And that kind of goes right down to a basking shark code of conduct, which you can find a copy of at the back there. More and more, thankfully, we're seeing basking sharks returning to our waters year after year. Less so in this part of the world than we used to. They seem to be spending a lot more time further north in the last kind of few years, which is interesting. But more and more people are kind of seeing them as a wildlife attraction, so put a code of conduct in place to make sure that if there are interactions between sharks and humans, they can be as positive for both parties as possible. So that kind of stakeholder engagement work we feel is really important. You don't just kind of make legislation and then just let it happen. You've got to kind of be there and make sure that you keep up the pressure to make sure that legislation is enacted. And really importantly, we feel, is getting people involved. Excuse me, we just sold something in that shop. Really importantly is to try and get people involved as widely as possible. I think with shark conservation over the years, there's been a kind of focus on another part of the world and problems which are caused by another part of the world, and it kind of takes away from us and what we can do here. And we do have sharks in our waters. We do. Our fishermen, European fishermen, do impact on that global trade in sharks. And so we try as much as possible to kind of bring it back and get people involved. And part of the way of doing that is through citizen science. Our most popular, I guess, and the most well engaged with citizen science project is very simple. It's the Great Egg Case Hunt. If any of you have ever been involved with it, then you'll know it's anyone can get involved. Basically, if you're on the beach, maybe you're doing a beach clean, or maybe you're just kind of pottering around and you look at the strand line, from time to time you will encounter these little things, mermaids' purses. And we've got a whole project around this. There's a leaflet at the back there you can grab. It's got an identification guide for when you pick up an egg case, you can identify it to species and you can record it. So we can record it on our website. You can also, there's a brilliant app that we've created for iPhones and Androids where you can actually just look on the app and it will walk you through the identification process, and you can take a photo, ID it, record it all in one go. And that might sound like, oh yeah, it's a bit fun, it's something that everyone can get involved with, but actually all of those little records added up give us a massive amount of data. We've got about 250,000 records now from around the UK coastline of mermaids' purses. That allows us to see where the different species are being encountered. We can start to think about, okay, if they're washing up on the beach here, where might the breeding grounds be? Where might be those special places where these creatures are going year after year to reproduce? And then you can start looking at breeding protection. So you can start saying, well, if this is a particular area where these species, which generally are mobile, so generally breeding protection doesn't work very well for mobile species because you protect a piece of seabed and then they go in and out of it. But if there are parts of their life history where they're reproducing and they come to a certain place, then this information can help us to identify that and potentially get marine protection in place. So it's something that everyone can do, but actually it can have a real genuine conservation outcome. And this project now has been so successful in the UK. It's been rolled out in Holland, in Portugal, in Ireland. There's a version of it in France, in South Africa. We're working with colleagues on the eastern seaboard of the United States. It's something that we're really kind of rolling out globally now to kind of get people from all around the world collecting and recording egg cases. So it's a really big deal. Anyway, so that's what we do. Back to sharks and shark conservation, and the story really starts here with Jaws. It's almost, I've kind of got to the point where it's not worth avoiding talking about it because everyone's going to talk about it. So I think it's kind of a really interesting start point of where shark conservation started. This film, Jaws, is blamed for a lot. It takes a lot of blame for all of the ills, all of the things that happened to sharks in the intervening sort of 40-45 years since the film was released. Some of that blame is probably deserved, some of it is probably not. Some of the things that have happened would probably have happened anyway, regardless of the film. But it is a kind of useful focal point, I think, for shark conservation. I think a lot of out of the kickback to this film, I guess, people started to be interested in sharks, people started to be interested in shark conservation. Lots of people I know in our sector actually were inspired by Jaws to do what they do. And so, the shark conservation sector has kind of grown over the last 40 years. It's still not massive. Really surprising how small it is actually, the number of people globally that are working on shark conservation. But it has, Jaws in some senses kind of kicked it off. And I think the thing about Jaws is that kind of hidden within it, I don't know if has anyone ever read the book, Jaws, as well as seen the film? It's a good read, it's worth a read. It's quite different from the film. And kind of hidden within the story, hidden within the blood and gore and the horror and the thrill and all of that, there's actually a love story in there. And the love story is Hooper, the marine biologist, who's just passionate about these sharks. And I don't think that comes out enough. I mean, it didn't work out well for Hooper in the film. He did unfortunately come to a sticky end. But he went in willingly. He went in kind of knowing, he loved these animals so much that he kind of gave himself up to it. And I think there's just a great quote I love that Hooper says in the book, and it just says how beautiful these creatures are. They're like an impossibly perfect piece of machinery. And anyone who's ever been in the water with a shark, anyone who's ever seen a shark swimming in its natural environment gets that quote, because they are just stunning. They are stunning to watch. They really kind of they make you feel pathetic as a swimmer. You know, they're just so incredibly graceful and powerful and elegant. And the great white shark really is kind of at the centre of all of this. They are the kind of the iconic shark, the stereotypical shark. They're the shark that everyone thinks about when you say the word shark. You think about this shark, and it has suffered with a terrible reputation over the years, and that has kind of driven, potentially that has driven a kind of attitude towards sharks generally. I think that attitude still prevails. I think if you read, every year maybe a basking shark will be seen off the Cornwall coast, and one of the major red tops will pick it up and turn it into a great white shark. And they kind of, they play off this kind of movie fear and loathing stuff. But I think actually, when you talk to real people rather than newspaper editors, I don't think that's what people think about these sharks. I think people are really just fascinated, and I think attitudes are changing. And there's this great set of images that came out last year from Ocean Ramsey, who makes it a kind of a habit of going and having her photo taken with wild animals to really kind of show that kind of connection between humans and wild animals. I'm not entirely sure I approve touching the white shark. I don't think that's particularly helpful because you might get copycatting, you might get other people going out, and at some point the great shark, the shark might be in the wrong mood and might take unkindly to it. But nevertheless, I think this set of photos really kind of demonstrates that the attitudes to great whites are moving on. For me, the important thing to think about with great whites is they are an incredible shark. They're an incredible species. They're an incredible thing to behold. But they are just one of many sharks, and they take far too much of the headlines. They take far too much variety. It's like judging all humans by one American president. It's kind of they're clouding the general view of sharks. And we have this fantastic diversity of sharks actually when you start looking into them. Yes, you've got the great white, huge great shark grows to 6 to 7 metres, but you've also got a shark that grows no bigger than the palm of your hand, pop in your pocket shark. You've got these amazing bowmouth guitarfish, beautiful, big flat-headed creatures. You've got the whale shark, the biggest fish in the ocean that would quite comfortably fill this room. You've got oceanic whitetips, solitary animals which cruise the oceans. The blue sharks as well, whose annual migration pattern, they go through 145 countries, territories, an incredible annual migration. So you've got these sharks that move huge distances in the course of a year. You've got also sharks like the zebra shark, which barely moves at all. At any point, they're just going to lie there. You've got sharks you've got sharks here, the epaulet shark, tiny little fur, they'll get up and walk. They'll get up and walk over the coral reef. Out of water, they'll come up and emerge out of water and walk over the coral reef. You've got wobbegons, weird tasseled things. You've got all the rays, you've even got the basking shark locally we talked about already. So you've got this amazing diversity of sharks, which just don't get talked about enough. And that's something that I think, we all should kind of engage with that a little bit more. In fact, there's over 1,000 different sharks and rays, actually around about 1,200 different sharks and rays in the oceans. So there's a lot more that we can be talking about rather than just the great white. And that's what I kind of encourage everyone to do. What joins them all together, what kind of is common amongst all of them, there are loads of differences between the different sharks. But one of the things that's common amongst them is they're all vital, they all play an important role within the ocean ecosystem they live in, and that might be the open seas, or it might be a coral reef, or it might be a rocky reef, or it might be within seagrass beds. They all play an important role within those systems. They all have a value of one sort or another. Some of them have a financial value, either whether that's through fisheries or whether that's through ecotourism. They've got a cultural value. They exist, and they make our world a richer place because they're there as a part of nature. But they are all vulnerable. They all have vulnerability. And that vulnerability is that they basically evolve over a very long period of time. They've been in the oceans, one way or another at 450 million years. Very slow evolving, kind of don't really change that much over the years. and then suddenly this predator, they never had predators as such, and then this predator comes along, humans, and put this pressure on them, and they're just not adapted to deal with it. They're slow growing, they don't mature till very late. The Greenland shark, for example, doesn't mature until it's 150 years old. So what chance has that got of sustaining a fishery? They give birth to very few pups at a time, each year, every couple of years they give birth to a couple of pups, some of them. So, there's this kind of, it varies obviously between species, but generally speaking, they're not, they're not cod pumping out 60 million eggs a year. They're more like humans in terms of their kind of reproductive patterns. So they're very vulnerable, particularly to overfishing. And it's difficult to say. It wouldn't be honest to say that if you remove this species, the whole ocean system is going to collapse. It wouldn't be honest to say that. But you can say that at some point, you keep removing things from the ecosystem, at some point, the whole thing's going to tumble down. And who knows, you might take a couple of blocks out of this game and it will be fine, and things won't change. Nature will adapt, but at some point you're going to take a block out and the whole thing's going to come falling down. So that kind of unpredictable future is what we're trying to kind of make sure that we don't end up enacting. So, how do we know, how do we judge the state of sharks? How do we judge the state of any animal? We have to go to science. We have to kind of ask science to tell us. And the most kind of universal way of doing that is the IUCN Red List of Species. You would have heard of Red List of Species. Its full title is the IUCN Red List of Threatened Species, which is slightly misleading because it includes species that aren't threatened. You go figure. But basically what we're doing is the IUCN will have specialist groups for different animal groups, and they said the shark specialist group would look at all of the sharks and rays, and they bring together all the data they can find, whether that's fisheries data, scientific research data, citizen science data. They bring all that data together, and they'll assign a category, they'll assign a status to each animal that they can assign a status to. And that'll go everywhere from down to this end, least concern, meaning, okay, they're pretty healthy populations, they're not anything we need to worry about too much. Through near threatened, which is like, they're probably okay at the moment, but we need to keep an eye on them. To vulnerable, to endangered, to critically endangered, extinct in the wild, and finally extinct. So you've got these kind of categories, and I guess if you can see that arrow there, effectively that direction of travel is unfortunately what we're facing with the majority of species. There are animals, there are species that will move back that way. It will happen through successful conservation. But on the whole, this is our problem. That everything's going this way, and the job of myself and my colleagues and people else in our world is trying to stop it, is trying to push it back in that direction, or at least arrest the kind of the flow of species in that direction. So it's a big job, and you just can't focus on it. As I've said, there's 8 of us. We can't look after every single one of those 12,050 species. So this is a way of helping us prioritise. This is a way of saying, okay, we're just going to have to not worry about those at the moment, but we are going to have to really kind of start to, these, nothing we can do about that. Is there anything we can do about that? What can we do at these different levels? What different actions can we put in place? So, to get an overall picture of where we are with sharks, the most recent review is this piece of work that was done, or released in 2015, which we were involved with all these other charities and non-governmental organisations. Basically, the IUCN, as part of this process, brought together all the data they could do and did a review of all of the shark species that they could. And this beautiful pie chart is what we get. And what that tells us is around about a quarter, that big slice there, the big green ones, they're what they call least concern. So, so about a quarter of those 1,038 species, 258 different sharks and rays, least concern. Don't worry about them yet. Maybe we'll have to worry about them in the future when they review it, maybe they'll move, but essentially a quarter we can not worry so much about. But we've got these threat categories: vulnerable, endangered, critically endangered. Those 3 together are the ones which are at elevated risk of extinction, and we've got nearly a quarter there. Nearly a quarter of the animals are there, and then you've got a few kind of in this in-between world where they're looking like they're going in the wrong direction, but at the moment they're not considered to be under threat. But the really big thing about this actually is that big grey slice at the top that kind of gets ignored. Because that big grey slice, they're called data deficient, which means just means they haven't got enough information about them. And so they could be within there, they could be animals that are already extinct, there could be animals that are of no concern, and there probably are animals that are within these three areas of threat. So that data deficiency is a real issue. It just means that we just don't know enough about them because we haven't got enough resources to kind of work out what's going on. And this kind of big question mark hangs over pretty much anything that happens in the ocean, to be honest. This kind of question mark, we just don't know enough about what happens in this environment that covers 72% of the surface of our planet, which actually accounts for 99% of the living space in our planet, the oceans. We just don't know enough about it. And we can kind of, we can scratch our heads about this and go, oh, isn't it terrible, we don't know very much about the oceans. Or we can say, actually, that's quite cool, it's quite exciting that we don't know. And that's certainly what drew me to this career and to marine biology, is that there's just so much that we still don't know. For young people, who are interested in this, I think there's a career in this because there's so much we still don't know. And more and more as time goes on, we're going to need to know that, and so more resources are going to go into finding out what's going on in the ocean. So I'm just going to give you a couple of examples of things that are actually, I think, quite stunning. This is the basking shark. This is an animal the size of a bus, that lives in our waters, comes in quite close to shore. We see it quite commonly in the summer. And when I first started working in marine conservation about 20 years ago, nobody knew where they went for like 6 months a year. Don't know. An animal the size of a bus, where do they go? There were these theories about they go to deep water and their gill rakers fall out and they just kind of go into some sort of weird hibernation state. There were other theories that they travel to other parts of the world, but we didn't really know where they went. And over the last 20 years, we've learned so much more about these animals. We've learned so much more about that hibernation thing. That was a complete kind of misdirection. But they do kind of move between different territories. They move between, tagging has helped us find out, because you've got to tag on. They turn up in different places, and you can start to stitch it together. You start to get a better idea of what's going on. But we've learned so much more about these amazing animals, and one of the sort of almost stupid things that we've learned about these animals is that they, even though they're really slow, have you ever seen one? Has anyone ever seen a basking shark in the water? But they're not the fastest animal in your mind's eye. You don't think this is a speedy shark. But they're capable of leaping right clear of the water. They're capable of breaching, like great whites are famous for doing. The basking shark does it as well. And when they breach, through tagging studies, they've been able to say that they always breach exactly the same angle. They'll always breach at 70 degrees out of water, and they always turn to the right, not the left, the right. They always turn to the right and land on their side, like that. Why do they do that? Why do they do that? And we just don't know. Probably, they think it's to do with kind of mating. It's to do with, it's a call. So this big loud slap, their side is the widest part, so it's the biggest slap when they're down on the water. And it's to do with kind of, these animals are dispersed over large distances, so it's like a male's call to the women, come in, I'm over here, kind of thing. But just, every year we find out more about that, and this research is happening in this part of the world. The University of Exeter doing some amazing stuff with tagging